A famous quote from Winston Churchill: "Democracy is the worst form of government, except for all those other forms that have been tried from time to time." Thus, he practically admitted that all political systems fail to bring peace, satisfaction, and fulfillment to people in general. In the known history of human civilization, there have been various political systems propounded by various political theorists and brought into practice by various leaders of nations, yet none of them seem to be fully satisfactory. Of course, some systems hardly even aim for the welfare of the citizens, but are unabashedly exploitive, and the tenets of Machiavelli attest to this. However, in more recent times, various political theories have aimed, at least in theory, at the well-being of the citizens. Why do all political systems fail to deliver? Let's look especially at communism and capitalism, which during the 20th century were two major competing systems, with the superpowers, Soviet Union and the United States of America. And also on the communist side, there was China, which was not a superpower nearly to the extent it is today, and other communist countries and the capitalist countries, the whole Western bloc and Japan. Basically, there were these two major political systems, communism and capitalism, with vast ideological differences and political struggle between them. If we're going to talk about communism, we're going to have to talk about it largely in the past tense, because the way it was going on in the 20th century as a major, powerful force in world affairs has largely ceased. It was characterized by state control of the economy and one-party rule. It's still going on to a large extent in China, but China has incorporated many elements of capitalism also. But anyway, we're talking in very broad terms now. So communism was characterized by state control of the economy, one-party rule. It covered about 1/3 of the world and stood in direct contrast to capitalism's emphasis on private ownership, free markets, and democratic governance. In communist systems, the state controls the means of production. It's agricultural production, industrial production, even artistic and intellectual production. The state controls it all. Property is collectively owned. That means no single person owns it. The state owns everything. And the government manages the economy by setting wages, prices, production goals with 5-year plans, 10-year plans, and so on. In capitalist systems, individuals or private companies or corporations own the means of production. And the free market, this amorphous entity called the free market, determines prices and wages driven by supply and demand. For instance, if something is much wanted but not much in supply, then the price goes up. So capitalism means private ownership of the means of production and of property and free markets. The system of government is democratic, presidential, parliamentary, direct democracy. driven by free enterprise. That means private businesses have the freedom to operate for profit without interference from the government. Now, again, we're talking very broadly. Governments do intervene in various ways, but the general idea is there should be free enterprise, which means that wealth is distributed unevenly. The capitalists, the ones who own the capital and the means of production, they tend to be very rich, and the workers tend to be very less situated in the economic scale. Education and healthcare are provided by private entities. Again, education and healthcare tend to become businesses. Theoretically, there's freedom of the press, and the uneven distribution of wealth means that there will be class distinctions. There's the upper class who have money. Generally, they're born into it. Or it may be that someone comes up. That's one promise of the capitalist system, that you can come up and become rich. And then there's the working class, blue-collar workers, and then the middle class, those who do administrative work, or they're small-time businesses, or they're in education, the middle class, not up, not down. The focus in such society is on the individual. The individual has to make their way and make their own progress in life. Whereas in communism, the government controls so much of the public, what you do, what you're allowed to say and what you're allowed to think. Much of the personal lives and actions of the citizens are controlled. The press is controlled and owned by the state, so that only ideas that the state wants you to have are propagated. Property is owned by the state. No free enterprise is allowed. Whereas in capitalism, free enterprise is encouraged, and especially in America, if someone has business flair, that's considered a good quality. But in the communist system, to make a profit by selling something is considered wrong and it's not allowed. Again, we're talking in very broad terms. In the communist system, wealth is distributed equally, at least theoretically. We did hear about Leonid Brezhnev, who was the head of the Soviet Union for several decades, having a huge collection of fancy cars. But practically to some extent, I saw when I went to the USSR, first time I think it was 1985, pretty much everyone is housed at the same level. Nothing fancy, but the needs are provided for. Yeah, the communist system, the focus is on the progress of the community as the whole. Education and health care are provided for by the state. And yeah, I saw that in the USSR. Everyone has some employment. So in that sense, communism was working. Everyone got their needs provided for: food, clothing, shelter, employment. Everyone was employed, even if the job didn't really mean doing anything, but it was a system that everyone had to work. The idea everyone works according to their capacity and takes according to their need. However, as I saw in the USSR, it's just subjective, what I saw in 1 week or so in 1985, and then I went again regularly after that. There was little freedom of expression, little freedom even culturally. You weren't allowed to have rock music, for instance, and people didn't seem to be very happy. Capitalism and communism have the following opposing sets of ideas. In capitalism, the idea is that the freedom of the individual is prime. Whereas in communism, the idea is that people need to cooperate, and they shouldn't be too individualistic. They should be put into a system where they cooperate. In capitalism, the idea is that there's competition, survival of the fittest, so to speak, and that when there's this competitive spirit and freedom to indulge in your individualism, then your full potential, people's full potential can come up. They can make new businesses. They can achieve great things, and not just in business, but in art, music, and so on. Whereas the communist idea is that everyone should work together as equals, and in this way, society will go on. Instead of emphasizing what individuals can achieve, make sure that everyone is equal and practically enforce that. A perceived problem in the capitalist system is that some people get very rich, whereas others hardly get by, but that's seen that people who get more rich do so because they are enterprising. They make use of their abilities. It encourages a spirit of hard work, whereas in communism, the idea is that no one should have more than anyone else. Why should anyone have more than anyone else? Everyone's needs are equally important. So it's capitalism. Government should not interfere with the rights of individuals to make their own way in the world and make their own living. Whereas in communism, the idea again, the emphasis, everyone's needs have to be met, so everyone has to be told what to do, guided what to do for the greater good of the whole society. In capitalism, the idea is that the government should interfere in the economy as little as possible, keep the government out as far as possible. Whereas in communism, central government controls the economy, controls everything. As far as possible. You can't totally control everything, but the emphasis is there. So capitalism, with its focus on individual liberty and economic competition, leads to greatness. It clashed with communism's emphasis on equality and social control. Capitalism and communism both believe in equality, but in communism, they try to impose equality by force, whereas capitalism recognizes that there are differences. But the equality in the capitalistic theory is that there's equal opportunity. Communism stresses that everyone should get their basic needs fulfilled: food, clothing, shelter, healthcare, employment. But it much restricts freedom in order to achieve this, and it stunts initiative and encourages laziness. Why should you work hard if anyway you're going to get your needs fulfilled? You're there in a factory and you're producing things, but anyway you're going to be employed. You don't get thrown out of a job for not doing it properly. So that works against efficiency because it's hard to motivate people. No one cares. If you're working in a company, you're going to be held accountable for not working properly because there's the boss at the top and he has managers underneath, and the boss wants to see that there's profit, which means everyone is doing their job properly. But in the communist system, people tend not to care. Who cares? Even the boss may not care that much, the boss in the factory. They have goals to produce so much, and they may fudge the figures or whatever. In between communism and capitalism, closer to communism, is socialism, which means that you have a highly developed welfare state within the capitalist system, which means there's a lot of taxing, But the welfare state has been criticized because it means that the lazy people, that's the idea, lazy people are maintained by the responsible people who work hard, and it encourages single mothers, which promotes illicit sex and divorce, breaks the family system, whereas capitalism is criticized for engendering big inequality between classes of people and exploitation of workers. And actually most Western countries are a hybrid with an admixture of socialism, government involvement in healthcare, education, and government control in these areas also. And the government sees that people get pensions. So it's a hybrid, but still it was clearly definable. There is the capitalist system and the communist system. And from both sides, the establishment was convinced that their system is right. Within the capitalist system, there were those who were supporters of communism, but they were largely shut out, especially in America, even though it's supposed to be freedom of speech, but supporting communism was considered anti-American, subversive, and within the communist system, if you were against the communist system, then you practically couldn't be against it. It was very heavy against anyone who stood against it. Both sides were convinced that our system is right and the other system is not just wrong, but bad. The capitalists would point out how in the communist countries people have no freedom, and the communists would point out how in the capitalist countries there's so much exploitation of the working classes. Therefore, communists and capitalists became mutual enemies, especially during the whole period from 1947, or maybe even a little before that, when Berlin fell, to 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed. So this whole period, approximately 45 years, was known as the Cold War. It was a period of tension around the world, rivalry between the two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, and their respective allies. There was no direct military conflict between the two superpowers, but instead there were proxy wars, an arms race, competition in technology, espionage, propaganda, and always a threat of a hot war direct war between the superpowers, which raised the fear of nuclear extinction. It's very prominent in the Western world, in Europe, in Western Europe, especially in the 1980s. People were pretty much convinced sooner or later we're all going to be nuked by the Soviet Union, then we'll all be killed. In the name of fighting communism, America lost many lives and killed so many lives in Korea, Vietnam, and Cambodia. At least fighting communism was the excuse. You never know what's going on with these politicians. Maybe the whole Cold War was orchestrated. Who knows? Anyway, the capitalists eventually won out. Western liberal democracy seemed to be and seems to be better in the public mind. You don't find thousands of people wanting to emigrate to China or Egypt, for instance, like they do to the United States, Canada, Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Western liberal democracies. The communists believed in violent overthrow in order to establish their system. In other words, the means justifies the end. And in order to bring in the communist utopia, they considered it right, proper to subvert other governments or overtly use violence on other nations and force to control their citizens in order to maintain communism. This was seen as evil, as Ronald Reagan famously referred to the Soviet Union as the evil empire in a 1983 speech. The major practical fault with communism is that it requires dictatorship. And, as we've all heard, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And in the 20th century, we saw the most horrific acts done by dictators. Not all communists. The most famous dictator was Hitler, infamous. But in the communist world, Stalin killed more people, it seems, even than Hitler, mostly his own citizens. Estimates for the number of Soviet citizens who died unnaturally under Stalin's rule was 7 million at a low estimate, and going up to 20 million or more. Want to be a communist? Estimates for the number of people killed during the Cambodian genocide under Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge from 1975 to 1979 range from 1.5 to 3 million, nearly a quarter of the whole population of Cambodia. Who was Stalin killing? Who was Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge killing? Anyone who disagreed with them. And if you didn't directly, openly disagree with them, if they thought you might be a threat to them, you would be imprisoned, tortured, or just killed. Democracy arose in the West as a response to the absolute power of monarchs. The system pretty much all over the world was considered the natural system, was that monarchs ruled the world. But in the Western world, philosophers like John Locke and Rousseau, they gave a different perspective and said, actually, the citizens, instead of working and living for the benefit of the monarch, should be around the other way, that the state should operate to benefit the citizens. And eventually, people in the liberal, what eventually came to be the liberal democratic world, came to view with horror absolute power, presuming, not without reason, that it will always lead to a disastrous situation for the citizens. However, all attempts to make people equal, either in communism, make them all economically equal, or in capitalism, equal opportunity, they overlook the reality of the world that the strong will always dominate the weak, which translates into might makes right, because no political system can stop the exploitive tendency by which persons, nasty persons, or wrong persons, or bad persons, somehow or other get power and use it to further their own interests over that of others, even in the name of serving them, as we see in Western democracies today. Practically, government policy works on the principle that the mass of people are fools who require to be controlled and told what to do, or molded to think, feel, and act as the leaders desire. The public will believe whatever lies they're told, and will vote for the ones who make the biggest promises, the ones who are the most articulate, someone who can give good speeches and convince people that he's acting for their interest, even though they've seen politicians after politicians, generation after generations, promising things and not delivering. Still the public tend to believe, oh yes, this one, we can trust him. People are foolish. What the public wants and what they'll vote for is not the same as what's best for them. There's a saying attributed to Churchill that the best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. Both communism and democracy are based on the presumption enshrined in the United States Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. But there are differences in how equality is perceived. Forced economic equality or equality of opportunity. The quotation, all men are created equal, is part of the sentence in the U.S. Declaration of Independence, which Thomas Jefferson penned in 1776 during the beginning of the American Revolution. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Pretty vague. What is liberty? What is happiness? But anyway, I'd mentioned John Locke, his treatise on government. This was the inspiration behind this idea that all men are created equal. It also presumes the existence of a creator, and they're explicating what they think God meant for us. However, there's a big mistake there, because it's just not true. Any system of social organization must fail if it is based on a cardinal. All systems of social organization must fail if based on a basic mistake, that all are equal. Democracy means that everyone has an equal vote, and although it sounds nice, the fact is that running a society is extremely complex. There are so many issues and so many factors, and most people, including those who are quite well educated, will not even be aware of what all the issues are, let alone the various options for tackling them. Another problem is that most people have unrealistic aspirations. They want government services for health, old age care, infrastructure, but they also want minimal taxes. They won't be happy with cutting down on government services, even if the government is practically bankrupt. But they also don't want high taxes. Another way the average voter of Winston Churchill is foolish is that most people want instant gratification. They want things which in the long run or even in the short term are not good for society, such as pornography. Who's going to go around saying, I want pornography? People don't go around advertising it. But obviously a lot of people do want it because it's a huge business. Government should stop it. Some may do. But in the Western liberal democracies, in the name of freedom of opportunity, they don't. But it's demeaning to both women and men and spoils the character. It should be banned. But in democracy, the main factor in government policies always seems to be financial considerations, because money means power, and although there's supposed to be equality, but you can buy influence, and pornography brings in money. So no one's even talking about banning it. It keeps the people besotted, dull and stupid. Apart from direct pornography, really gross pornography, even having pictures of women everywhere in seductive poses and very little clothing or revealing clothing, that would have been considered quite wrong even, 100 years ago. in almost all of the world. But then democracy gives votes to all, and it tends towards the lowest common denominator. And society without high ideals must degrade. People tend to be guided more by their base desires, their lust and their greed and their biases, more than their intelligence, if they have any developed intelligence. The education system in the Western liberal democracies is supposed to develop your critical thinking, but we see most people, what does their critical thinking lead to? Substance abuse, broken marriages. What's the use of this society? Their desire rules. What rules the world? Is it money? Yes. Desire? Yes. High ideals? No. People are made stupid by the consumer society, which advertises to people to buy more and more things that they don't need. Always putting desires in people's minds for things which they wouldn't want if they weren't told about it, and they can get on with their life quite well without it. But the consumer society means that you always have to create more and more things so that people spend more and more. So in this way, there are no high ideals, appealing to the lowest common denominator, appealing to people's lowest tendencies instead of their highest tendencies, which means to appeal to their immediate desires, as is seen in elections in India, especially the state-wise elections in which the parties offer what are called SOPs. They say, vote us into power and we'll give every household a TV set. And they get in power and they give everyone a TV set and they promote their own party's TV channel. Or we'll give a cow to every village home. A previous state government in Delhi had women, not men, ride free on the local buses, discriminating against men. Where does the money come from? Where does the money come for all of this? These kinds of policies, handouts for the public, get votes, but they cripple the economy. So in the long term, it's a very bad policy. The politicians want to get voted in somehow or other, knowing that they'll only be there for a short time. So they don't mind if they hand on a mess to the next incoming politicians. Another anomaly of democracy in India is the reservation system, affirmative action, which gives quotas of places in education and government jobs to people from what are called backward castes, and in several states to Muslims, which means that if you're born in a certain situation, in what's called a backward caste, if you're born in a Muslim family, then you have a quota to be accepted in an educational course or a government job, that even if you don't get very high marks or you're not very qualified, you have the privilege to be accepted in educational courses or government jobs, and persons from other backgrounds are penalized for being born in what's called a high caste. This also perpetuates caste discrimination. It works against merit. People with less competency get the jobs because they are less competent, but they are from a certain family background. It works against the interest of society, but it's good for getting votes. Democracy is promoted as if it's almost sacred. In the name of promoting democracy, so many people had to die in Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam, so many other places, inflicting so much suffering in the name of protecting or instituting democracy. And it goes on today. If we look at democratic society today, okay, people, they want to emigrate to America and Western Europe, but people in these countries, especially the young people today, are going through an epidemic of unhappiness and confusion. People are basically unhappy. So many mental problems. The family unit is broken. People are confused about their gender, and in so many ways it's a horrible civilization. It's a culture of death, typified by factory farming, eating meat, abortion, wars. In the democratic countries, there's plenty of money to kill people by making more and more weapons, but they don't have money enough to build homes for the huge number of homeless people in America and Britain. Seems there's more homeless people in America than India, I would guess. Now, all these different systems must fail because they're based on ignorance of what human life is meant for, the purpose of life. All these systems attempt to solve the problems in society in ignorance of the fact that this world is a world of problems. You're never going to stop all the problems in the world by any political system or any other system. Sociology, science, education, as well as different political systems, they have some aim of making life better on earth, utopia on earth, which is not possible. The more they try, the worse things get. Materialistic people who do not know that the purpose of life is to spend human life in service to God, not forgetting our duty to man and to other species and to the environment. But materialistic people think that you can improve society simply by education, enacting laws, improving, what they call improving, socio-economic systems, but no civilization based on ignorance of our spiritual goal of life can deliver human happiness, human fulfillment. It's a mistake to think that simply by instituting systems, the tendency of people to try to dominate others and exploit them unfairly can be controlled. There are laws and systems in all countries for trying to stop theft and corruption. In democracy, if people are dissatisfied with the leaders, they can be voted out. This is supposed to check exploitation and dominance by one person or a small group of people over others. But factually, the way democracy is going on at the present time, it's such that powerful vested interests practically control the whole way of life. So it's been noted in the United States that it makes little difference who is voted in as president or which party comes to power. That's changing. But generally it's been seen that whoever's in power, either Democrat or Republican, it makes little difference to the underlying power equation, which lies with the moneyed elite who have implemented ways to shape the way of thinking of the populace in such a way that people go along with the status quo by controlling the mass media. The predominant message which goes out is to uphold the system, even by manufacturing lies. Spin doctors. It's called the deep state. It is being pushed back against a little bit. But the basic thing is that the strong are exploiting the weak, but even the strong, which means economically strong, they also are not happy in the system. The United Kingdom is supposed to be the oldest and most venerable democracy. Well, there was some kind of democracy in ancient Greece, but in recent times. But in Britain, it's understood that the establishment continues to direct the country and the life of its citizens. It's been going on for centuries. In the United States, top politicians tend to come from Ivy League universities. The French Revolution had three main aims: liberté, fraternité, égalité. But the idea that we can have liberty, bonhomie, and equality simply by making slogans is naive. And practically, the French Revolution was born in terrible bloodshed and continued with terrible bloodshed until again a dictator came in the form of Napoleon, who made more bloodshed. Jeremy Bentham, a British political and social philosopher, proposed utilitarianism, the highest good for the greatest number of people. But what is that highest good and how to achieve it? It's hard to ascertain. And then if you think of the highest good for the greatest number of people, what about the minorities? Then you get majoritarianism, in which minority groups are oppressed. And although political systems are supposed to think of the welfare of the people, what about the animals? They're also part of the country. They're also living beings in the country. But the Christian idea that animals are put there by God for us to eat and exploit has carried through into the post-Christian era, so that political systems in all countries, they make very little provision for the cows, pigs, chickens, and so on, which in the modern advanced technological age are an economic product to be tortured and slaughtered in millions. Equality? Well, of course, cows, pigs, chickens, and so on, they're not equal on the karmic scale to humans. And we want to have a political system that is treating all humans well. But does that mean treating humans well means that we have to cause so much suffering to lower species? People don't know the laws of karma, the laws of nature, the laws of God. So you make all these different plans and schemes, but if you cause mass suffering to lower species, that will come back on humankind, as we see all over the world. There are so many ideas: capitalism, communism, so many isms: socialism, fascism, corporatism, anarchism, colonialism, fundamentalism, terrorism, Anglicism, sexism, atheism, secularism, scientism, empiricism, impersonalism, sophism, absolutism, all useless isms without knowledge of what human life is meant for. All these different philosophies and political systems are based on ignorance, and they cannot avoid spawning seriously bad effects. However nice sounding they may be or well-intentioned they might seem to be. And the great example is that of communism, whose message of equality of mankind might seem to be flawlessly benign, yet the implementation of it was a terrible disaster. Clearly, democracy is better. Is it? In Europe especially, and also in America, many people seem to be giving up on democracy and gravitating toward extreme political expression, what they call the far right, being frustrated with the chaos that has come about in democratic systems that increasingly typifies the world today. And people's minds are also chaotic. In democracy, it's supposed to be the rule of the people, but people feel powerless in the face of a system that manipulates them against their own interests. That's how it's seen. And they look to extreme solutions in an increasingly confused and worsening situation. Again, they feel they have no power to stop the way the world is going. A prime example of that is the mass immigration in the Western countries, which people didn't vote for per se. And now there's a pushback against that. Is there another way? Yeah. You can guess what I'm going to say. We have Krishna's system given by God. What are we talking about here? Theocracy? Well, that's already shown to be wrong, isn't it? And yeah, what I'm going to talk about now is not going to be well accepted, but at least you could think about it, seeing as all your systems are failing. Krishna's system is dictatorship, benevolent dictatorship, but based on the understanding that people don't know what's best for themselves, and it's better to have someone trained to orchestrate society in a manner that is best for everyone. This might seem horrific. Dictatorship, but this is enlightened dictatorship with trained rulers who don't have absolute power because they're trained to submit to the guidance of ministers who are brahmanas in the true sense of the word. Brahmanas means materially detached and neutral politically and emotionally, who advise the king in a manner that the king acts for the overall benefit of the whole society, keeping very strongly in the center that the ultimate benefit of everybody is their ultimate spiritual benefit. One advantage of primogeniture, that the king is the son of the previous king, is that you're born into the job, you're trained to do it from the beginning. You're not someone who's lied to get votes because you're power hungry or forced their way in as a dictator. And a good monarch will have no reason to back down on the right thing to do. He does the right thing because it needs to be done. He doesn't have to worry about getting votes. You could end up with a fool or a tyrant, but then again, the brahmanas have to intervene and dethrone a king who's incompetent or evil. Billy Connolly, you may have heard of, a Scottish entertainer, said, "The desire to become a politician should automatically ban you for life from ever becoming one." Krishna's system, the Vedic political and cultural system, aims at regulating society such that people can live peacefully, happily, as possible in this world, cooperatively, while making progress to get out of this world. With the understanding that simply, even if you can fulfill all the material needs, people will remain dissatisfied because the need of everyone above food, clothing, shelter, sex is spiritual need. At the root of all the failures of these political systems is at least a purported catering for the material needs of mankind, but not the spiritual needs. The example is given that if you have a bird in a cage and you keep the cage very clean and polished, but you don't feed or care for the bird will die. So in the same way, we can look after the body and the bodily needs of humans But the soul in the body, if that is not cared for, if that is not nurtured, then we become spiritually dead and will always be dissatisfied. Ignorance of the purpose of human life, that we are spiritual beings. Our spiritual needs are required to be taken care of. In ignorance, we cannot but fail in all our plans and so-called solutions. But Krishna's system is based on the proper understanding that beyond the basic needs of ahara, nidra, abhaya, maitun, eating, sleeping, protection, and sex, social life, humans have spiritual needs, which, if not fulfilled, must lead to discontent, individually and collectively. First of all, it should be understood, which it has not been understood in the whole span of the Western dominance of the world, that each human life is only one life in the transmigration of souls from body to body to body. Thus, it's misunderstood that this life is all in all, and that either you just die and everything is finished, or, as was traditionally understood or misunderstood in Christianity and Islam, and is still this misunderstanding prevails in Christianity and Islam, that when you die you either go to heaven forever or hell forever. But the real fact is that we transmigrate from body to body, and that human life is meant for living in such a way that we can get free from this painful cycle of birth and death, or at least we can make progress on that path. Also, by understanding of transmigration of souls, we should understand that all actions have reactions, the laws of karma, and therefore we should not mistreat others, lest we suffer sinful reactions. We should not mistreat others, at least because we know that we will get a reaction, bad reaction to that. So the Vedic social system is based on this metaphysical understanding, and the understanding that we are all born in certain bodies due to our previous actions and desires, and not everyone is equal. Someone is born with a silver spoon in their mouth, someone is born with a plastic spoon in their mouth, and if someone is born in a privileged position, that's what they got from their previous life, and a less privileged position, that's what you got from your previous position. On the basis of understanding that we are all born with different physical and psychological capacities, the Vedic Varnashram system is based on the principle that happiness comes from utilizing our physical and mental capacities in service, not trying to exploit the world for our own satisfaction, not from trying to live in this world to get others to serve us, but we're all meant for cooperation, which means service of others, and ultimately our true spiritual identity is as servants of the Supreme Lord, Krishna. So, there are two major errors in all these man-made political systems. One is not understanding that we are all spiritual beings, and artificial equality. The Vedic system accepts that there is equality on the spiritual platform. Spiritually, we're all equal. But materially, we are not. We get different bodies according to our karmic situation. Are men and women equal? No. I'm not equal in this male body. My male body is not equal to a woman's body in the matter of giving birth to children. I can't get pregnant. Women have a super important role as mothers and should be protected to act as ideal mothers because, as stated in the Bhagavad-gita, when women are given the freedom to mix around and have many, many partners, then the quality of children that are born to them is called Varna Sankara. It means by their very birth, the karmic background by which they're brought into this world, the whole world situation becomes hellish by people being born out of lust. Therefore, the Vedic literature strongly warns against illicit sex, because when in the name of freedom, sexual perversity and degradation is allowed and encouraged, then you can have any political situation you like, but people will, by their very psychological propensity, they'll be very disturbed, very low in consciousness, and you can't organize people for peace and prosperity. Whatever big parliaments and speeches you have. In Krishna's system, everyone, men and women, are guided and trained to act according to their propensities and abilities and the status of life that they have achieved in their present birth. Society should be organized under the direction of saintly people trained in Vedic knowledge. They're called brahmanas. This doesn't mean necessarily brahmana by birth, but they're trained to give direction to society, which means that they are the leaders of society, but that doesn't mean that they live in luxury, exploiting others. Rather, the opposite. True Brahmana is duty-bound to live very simply and to contribute the best knowledge to human society, both spiritual and temporal. The implementation of administration is by the Kshatriyas, who are very physically and mentally powerful, active. They act under the direction of Brahmanas to protect the citizens from criminals and to organize society so that the material needs of everyone are seen to, that peace and harmony are maintained in society with the clear aim to give everyone an equal opportunity to make spiritual advancement. This might sound utopian, but Vedic society is based on the understanding that there is no utopia in this world. There will always be problems, but the Vedic society, if properly administered, can come as close to the ideal of a society than that we can have in this world. But with the understanding that basically life in this world is full of misery that cannot be circumvented by any political system, but an enlightened political system is based on understanding this, that mitigating miseries to the extent that is possible by government intervention should be done, and the government should, for instance, see that there are educational, medical, and other such facilities for the citizens. So this Krishna conscious movement has as a social aim to ultimately establish such a system. That can be done if, first, there is an awakening of spiritual consciousness among the masses of people. We're not going to organize an army to go and fight with the non-Krishna conscious people, but we wish to awake spiritual consciousness among the masses by which people can understand that the purpose of life isn't to get some new gadget or enjoy your senses this way, that way, or the other, but that the real purpose of life is God realization. And this can be awakened by the mass promotion of the chanting of the holy names of God. That can be chanted according to the Hebrew system, Christian system, Islamic system, in the Vedic system, we especially emphasize the chanting of Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. People will not believe that simply chanting these holy names of God can do more benefits for society than any number of conferences, meetings, speeches based on ignorance of the purpose of life. So there it is in a nutshell, why all political systems fail and how the Krishna consciousness movement aims to institute political systems that can best serve humankind and all the species of life in the best possible way. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama,